The life of Dennis, a hard-working salaryman, changed forever when he was abruptly summoned to a dark, imposing castle. Before him sat the Demon King, a majestic figure who sought Dennis's strategic mind rather than his magical prowess. The king revealed that Dennis's corporate diligence made him the perfect candidate to lead the demon army's logistics. However, the legendary Big Four generals were not easily impressed by a mere human in a suit. Yulandra immediately challenged Dennis, questioning if he possessed any power to stand among them. To prove his worth, Dennis was assigned a mission that had stumped even the most powerful demons, negotiating with the Minotaurs. Dennis traveled to the rugged lands of the Minotaurs, where the massive chief Terius awaited with a scowl. Yulandra tried her hand at diplomacy, but her aggressive style only led to deadlock shouting matches. Observing the room, Dennis noticed the discarded straw on the floor and remembered a lesson from his corporate days. He realized that there was a cognitive gap between the demon's expectations and the Minotaur's basic biological needs. Instead of demanding loyalty, Dennis began cleaning the hall and organizing fresh bedding for the tired warriors. Chief Terius watched in confusion as this human treated him with a level of consideration no demon ever had. Dennis explained that effective negotiation requires understanding the partner's perspective, even down to their sleeping habits. Touched by Dennis's insight, Chief Terius finally agreed to bring the Minotaur tribe into the demon army's fold. Upon their return, the Demon King officially bestowed the silver bracelet of the Big Four upon Dennis. Even the fiery Yulandra found herself begrudgingly accepting Dennis as her newest comrade in arms. Dennis knew this was only the beginning of his journey to restructure this chaotic world with his 200 IQ strategies. He began his next task by auditing the organizational charts of the army to find hidden inefficiencies. His search for the elusive General Sulfid led him to a mysterious door that remained perpetually locked. A small assistant named Belinda appeared, trying to usher Dennis away with nervous excuses. Dennis noted that her name didn't appear on any official rosters and her glasses were far too modern for a simple servant. He deduced that Belinda was actually General Sulfid herself, hiding in plain sight to avoid more responsibilities. Exposed, Sulfid invited Dennis into her workshop, which was filled with half-finished inventions and ancient scrolls. Dennis proposed a new project, creating an affordable magic artifact that would allow demihumans to cast spells like demons. Sulfid complained that the cost of materials was astronomical, making mass production impossible for the common folk. But Dennis suggested using lower-grade stones and specializing each device for only one type of magic to cut costs. Realizing the genius of this modular design, Sulfid immediately dragged Dennis into a marathon crafting session. They worked through the night, surrounded by sparks and the hum of experimental enchantments. By morning, they had created the Rosemarin, a breakthrough in magical accessibility for the common people. Their success was immediately put to the test when a flock of dangerous monsters attacked a nearby village. Dennis equipped the new artifacts and led a small team of demihumans to defend the settlement. The monsters lunged at them, and for a moment, the untested devices seemed to fail. With a sudden burst of frequency, the Rosemarin emitted a piercing sound that halted the creatures in their tracks. The villagers cheered as the threat was neutralized without the need for a single drop of blood. Sulfid watched from the shadows, finally seeing the value in her work through Dennis's eyes. Dennis realized that if he could solve the magic crisis, he could surely solve the growing food shortage as well. He returned to the castle with a new objective: to overhaul the kingdom's entire economic infrastructure. He began by meeting with the local merchants to understand the flow of trade and the influence of the guilds. It wasn't long before he discovered a conspiracy to hoard supplies and drive up prices for the commoners. With his 200 IQ mind at work, Dennis prepared a strategy that would dismantle the greedy guild once and for all. Dennis adjusted his glasses as he surveyed the massive stockpile of grain recently acquired from the integrated ogre territories. The hunger that once plagued the demon capital was finally beginning to recede thanks to his new distribution supply chain. However, the logistical victory did little to appease the warrior castes who viewed trade as a coward's path. General Yulandra stood before him, her crimson armor gleaming under the flickering chandeliers of the council chamber. She demanded to know why the kingdom's gold was being spent on silos instead of sharpening the blades of her vanguard. Dennis didn't flinch, merely sliding a detailed balance sheet across the table toward the enraged general. He explained that an army that eats well fights twice as hard and dies half as often from fatigue. Yulandra scoffed at the numbers, believing that demonic spirit alone could overcome any physical limitation. To bridge this divide, Dennis proposed a compromise that would modernize the very definition of demonic warfare. He sought out the most reclusive mind in the realm, a goblinoid inventor named Sulfid, who lived in the volcanic depths. Sulfid was surrounded by a chaotic mess of discarded gears and cracked mana crystals when Dennis arrived. The inventor didn't care for politics or titles, barely looking up from his latest failed experiment. Dennis spoke the language of the craftsman, offering the one thing Sulfid lacked, an infinite supply of rare materials. Sulfid's goggles adjusted with a mechanical whir as he finally realized the scale of the salaryman's ambition. Dennis didn't want a single masterwork sword, he wanted a factory that could produce 10,000 mana-infused rifles. The idea of mass production was alien to this world, yet it ignited a spark of genius in Sulfid's eyes. Together, they spent weeks designing a standardized system for enchanting equipment using modular components. General Yulandra interrupted their work often, claiming that such toys would make the soldiers weak and reliant. Dennis invited her to a live demonstration, knowing that visual proof was the only way to convince a warrior. At the testing range, a low-level goblin soldier was equipped with the new mana rifle prototype. With a single trigger pull, a concentrated beam of arcane energy obliterated a heavy iron target 50 yards away. Yulandra's eyes widened as she realized that even a weak recruit could now hold the power of a mid-tier mage. Dennis pointed out that this technology didn't replace skill, but rather augmented the army's overall lethality. The general began to see the logic, imagining her shock troops breaking through human fortifications with such range. But industrialization required more than just blueprints, it required an immense amount of mana battery cells. To secure the necessary crystals, Dennis had to negotiate with the secretive deep dwarf clans who controlled the mines. These dwarves were not allies of the Demon King, maintaining a cold neutrality for centuries. Dennis didn't offer them friendship, but a lucrative trade agreement that promised them a share of the finished tech. Within a month, the first true assembly line in history was established in the heart of the capital. Dennis walked through the rows of workers, his presence instilling a sense of corporate discipline never before seen in demons. Even General Yulandra had joined the effort, personally training the new rifle brigades in advanced tactics. However, the sudden surge in economic and military power did not go unnoticed by the neighboring human kingdoms. Reports of thunderstaves and ever-full granaries reached the ears of the Holy Emperor. For now the demon realm was flourishing, its internal racial discord replaced by the shared goal of prosperity. Dennis sat in his office late at night, finally feeling a sense of accomplishment he never found in his old corporate life. He looked at a small faded photo of his old office desk, a reminder of the world that had discarded him. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble, a low vibration that shook the very foundations of the castle. A scout burst into the room, gasping for air and covered in soot and blood. He spoke of shadows in the sky, thousands of wings blotting out the moon over the northern borders. The Wyvern invasion had begun, and it was far larger than any military projection Dennis had ever calculated. Yulandra's voice boomed through the communication crystals, calling for an immediate mobilization of the new brigades. But as Dennis watched the horizon, he realized the Wyverns were only the vanguard for something much, much larger. A roar that sounded like grinding tectonic plates echoed across the land, silencing all other sounds. Dennis gripped the edge of the balcony, his mind racing to adapt his industrial power to a threat that defied all logic. The screen fades to black as the first wave of fire rains down upon the outer defenses, leaving the fate of the kingdom in the balance. The fiery sky cracked open as thousands of wyverns descended upon the demon kingdom's outer walls. Dennis stood atop the command tower, his modern suit jacket fluttering in the hot wind of the invasion. He adjusted his glasses and tapped a glowing communication crystal to relay orders to the front lines. General Yulandra let out a primal roar as she ignited her twin blades with infernal soulfire. Below the ramparts, the Minotaur heavy infantry formed a perfect phalanx, exactly as Dennis had drilled them. The Sulfid engineers unleashed the new mana cannons, sending beams of concentrated light into the wyvern swarm. Despite their efficiency, the ground began to tremble with the approach of a mountain-sized calamity. A behemoth of ancient legends stepped out from the mist, its footsteps shattering the very bedrock of the valley. Dennis felt a familiar pang of corporate burnout and helplessness, remembering his failures in his previous life. He shook his head, casting aside the shadows of his past to focus on the living soldiers who depended on him. He broadcast his voice across the entire battlefield using the amplified mana network. He told them that they were no longer just demons or demihumans, but a single unstoppable machine of progress. Dennis initiated Phase Gamma, a complex maneuver involving synchronized magic and physical logistics. The Overs launched the Sulfid explosive charges into the behemoth's path with perfect timing. A series of massive detonations rocked the Titan, forcing it to its knees as the earth buckled. Yulandra led the final charge, diving from the clouds like a comet to strike the beast's core. With a final, agonizing groan, the mountain-sized calamity crumbled into harmless spirit dust. The wyvern swarm scattered in terror, leaving the Demon Kingdom's skies clear for the first time in days. Dennis slumped against the stone railing, the adrenaline finally leaving his weary body. The Demon King approached him, his heavy cape sweeping across the scorched floor. The king looked out over the surviving army, and then back at the human who had saved them all. He told Dennis that power was common, but the wisdom to manage it was a gift of the gods. Dennis thought about his old boss, who never knew his name, and realized he had finally found his true home. He stood up and looked the Demon King in the eye with a gaze that commanded respect. Dennis knelt and officially accepted the offer to become the heir to the demon throne. A cheer erupted from the courtyard below, thousands of voices uniting in a single cry of triumph. Yulandra and the other generals approached, bowing to their new sovereign with genuine loyalty. Dennis knew that the real work of building an empire of efficiency had only just begun. Months passed as the scars of war were replaced by the hum of a thriving industrial economy. The once divided tribes now lived in harmony, governed by the laws Dennis had drafted. Dennis sat at his new desk, which was far larger and more grand than his old cubicle. He chuckled as he noticed a report about Yulandra trying to use a spreadsheet for her training schedules. He realized that he had achieved the ultimate corporate dream in the most unlikely of places. The Demon King entered the room, no longer a master, but a friend and advisor. They toasted to the future of the Empire and the end of the Age of Chaos. Dennis knew that no matter what challenges came, his strategy would always prevail. He had finally found a world where his mind was valued more than his overtime hours. The camera panned back to show the entire sprawling capital, a beacon of order in a magical world. The story of the Salaryman turned sovereign became a legend passed down through generations. Dennis closed his ledger for the night, ready to lead his people into a new dawn.